Joining our conversation, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wonder if you can respond to something Frank Figliuzzi said on this program, that one of the challenges as reporting is coming out now from law enforcement and prosecutors is that there may not be an adequate set of charges, that there aren't vigorous domestic terrorism charges. Is that something that you think Congress should take a look at?
Well, it's worth taking a look at, Nicolle, but I'm not sure that's right. In other words, every single person who was in the Capitol that day was interfering with the proper operation of the federal government. That's a pretty serious federal crime, not to mention trespassing, not to mention ignoring officers. The other side of the argument that your guest was making, of course, is that when you start talking about additional laws around domestic terrorism, you get into things like motive, frame of mind. You bump right up against the government's, of course, constitutional prohibition on punishing speech. So, look, I was there. And anybody who is inside that Capitol is prosecutable under currently existing laws. And depending on what prosecutors decide to do with respect to asking for sentences and penalties, could really suffer for their egregious actions.
Are you eager to understand their sort of goings-ons at the appropriate time so that it doesn't jeopardize any of the cases they're making around seeing if they can prove conspiracy and conspiracy to commit sedition?
I certainly hope, Nicolle, that if there were groups, and I was there, and I sort of the night before saw these folks. There was a very wide and diverse array of people there that day. Any of whom, as we already discussed, trespassing in the Capitol, being inside the Capitol, were breaking the law. But I think it's quite possible that you had levels of organization, small groups. You see these pictures of people in tactical gear moving as a unit. If they pre-planned that, by all means, again, people died, people's lives were put at risk. This was an insurrection against the United States. Yeah. So if prosecutors can prove that there was conspiracy, that is a seditious conspiracy. That is a very, very serious crime. And the book ought to be thrown at them hard.
The Republican, I don't even know if you can call it a defense of the president's role, turning to impeachment now, seems to be, this is a paraphrasing of Marco Rubio on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, it's stupid. They don't really have a substantive reason why Trump shouldn't be impeached and why he shouldn't be held accountable and convicted in the Senate. Let me play some of that for you. And I want to ask you about disinformation and the dissemination of these messages.
Well, first of all, I think the trial is stupid. I think it's counterproductive. We already have a flaming fire in this country, and it's like taking a bunch of gasoline and pouring it on top of the fire.
Do you believe Donald Trump committed an impeachable offense?
To begin with, I think it's a moot point, because I think right now Donald Trump is no longer the president. He is a former president. So it's almost, I hesitate to say this is more pathetic than their defenses to the last impeachment, which amounted to, yes, the case was proven, but let's let the election determine what happens to Donald Trump. I wonder how much you think public opinion factors into what Senate Republicans ultimately do.
Well, political opinion matters entirely. And, with all due respect, Nicolle, I heard what you said about hoping that this would be a vote of conscience, that this would be people acting as jurors. That's not what's happening here. Marco Rubio is saying what he's saying because he wants to be president, because he worries about being primaried as a Republican senator. All of the Republican senators have looked at the 10 members of the House who voted in favor of the article impeachment, and the fact that every single one of them, as courageous and as full of integrity as they are, every single one of them is being promised a primary. And with a few exceptions, you don't begin to have that level of political courage in the ranks of the Republican senators. So what they're going to do is, look, you can't defend what the president did, particularly in the context of trying to fraudulently overturn the election in Georgia, trying to do this bizarre coup inside the Department of Justice. You can't defend the actions of the president. So instead, you're going to say, oh, well, he's out of there. Gosh, it's divisive. They're going to come up with all of these process reasons to take the heat off of something that they not only don't want to deal with, but something that they participated in. Remember, most of these senators were complicit in promoting the lie that the election had been stolen. So it's a terribly uncomfortable moment for them, and they just want it to go away, and they're going to use process and faulty constitutional arguments rather than addressing the, of course, article itself.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.